Hi, guys. It is June 23rd, which means it is Pride Month. I wanted to take some time to do like a vlog or a talk about some of my thoughts on queerness, my experience with queerness, and just kind of celebrate that journey real quick during Pride Month. And again, I don't think I have some like magical experience that's going to, I always say this, I don't feel like I have some crazy like magical experience that is life-changing or profound, but I simply think that the normalization of what I'm experienced has been helpful to others who are experiencing the same thing. So maybe there's someone out there listening that will identify and go, hey, me too. Or they will come to a conclusion that I came to maybe a little bit quicker, which is helpful. And then other times people will come to conclusions that I didn't come to and they'll share them with me and it will like advance my life and my psyche. So I am just here to share my journey through queerness as a queer woman and celebrate Pride because I'm allowed to celebrate Pride. I want to do a few items of housekeeping. First, being that I am a queer woman in a hetero-facing relationship. And that comes with a big old backpack privilege because I do not have to walk in the same shoes and have the same difficulty as someone in a same-sex relationship. I have before, of course, and I've been in lots of styles of relationships over my short little life, but I am currently in a hetero-facing relationship, which does make my life a lot easier. So, being in a hetero-facing relationship as a queer woman is so interesting because your queerness is not validated, which is a thumbs down, but you're also walking with a lot of privilege because no one's really recognizing on the day-to-day that you're a queer woman. So, thumbs up, I guess, question mark. So, it's a weird duality to walk in, and I'll get into that, but I just wanted to take a minute and acknowledge that I am speaking about being a queer woman, and I am living as a queer woman in a hetero-facing relationship, which comes with a lot of privilege. So just acknowledging that I'm not dealing with a lot of the hardships as same-sex relationships that are outwardly presenting in that way. So that is kind of what my reality looks like. The other item is that one of the big reasons I'm making this video is because I know that there are a lot of women like me that are queer women, LGBTQIA, so many different flavors and mixtures of queerness that are also in hetero-facing relationships, and they feel like they cannot celebrate themselves during Pride. And that's always been such a huge bummer to me. And I know it's very complicated and it's complicated for different people. Some people are out. Some people like to lay claim to that. Some people don't. Some people don't fully understand that. I know a lot of closeted queer women that are in hetero-facing relationships, and not because they want to get out of their hetero-facing relationship, but they are simply a queer person in a hetero-facing relationship. And it's just kind of weird. We'll get into it, like, I'll try to get into it of how, like, society views queer women in hetero or men in hetero-facing relationships, bi men and women, pan men and women. It's very complicated. But that's another reason I'm speaking up about this is because for so long I felt so confused because I was like, wait, I'm queer AF, yet I feel like I should not be celebrating Pride. I should not be speaking about myself as queer, and I should not be taking up space in queer spaces. And I've healed that within myself now, and I do take up a lot of space and I try and be very loud in the queer spaces because people like me also need representation. We're kind of those like middle categories that get lost in the cracks, and we just pick a side or like pick a team for the time being, and we're always explaining ourselves and always making ourselves small. So that's another reason that I'm talking about this because I feel like that area really needs a lot of like attention and normalization. So I currently identify as pan. I have changed that definition for myself over the years. I think that's really important part of the journey for me is identity. Identity is important to me. Some people will, you know, put down a discussion like this and be like, it's not about the labels, just be with who you want to be with. And that's very true, but labels can also be really important to people because identity and how you present and how you speak about yourself is really important because it can account for the different parts of yourself. and it can change over time. So I currently identify as pan, and I feel very firm in that identity because I have lived in many different sexual identities over, I'm 34, so I haven't been around forever, but long enough to kind of figure that out. And I was late to the game, and I'll get into that too of figuring all that out. So I currently identify as pan. Previously, for a very long time, probably over a decade, I identified as bi. And I've kind of shifted that to identify as pan, and I feel like that fits me better now. And I feel confident in that. So it has been a big journey arriving at the identity of pan. I used to almost push the identity of pan away just from lack of understanding. And so that understanding has taken me a little bit to get to. So, one of the biggest struggles for me in my queer journey and figuring all this out throughout life was being raised in a religious oppressive environment. So I was raised in a high control, like evangelical Christian flavored, like cult environment, basically. And that permeated every part of my life, my household, religious activities, and my schooling. So it was across the board. Also, for context at that time, I was born in 1992, so there was already had been a lot of work done in queer spaces to pave the way. So there was a lot of normalization that had already happened and that I was already, living in a world that was the wheels were a little bit more greased, you know what I mean? As if different than as if you were born in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, things like that, where it was just a no-go zone. So we had a good amount of vocabulary, and there was a lot of activism that had taken place, and a lot of way had been cleared. But at the same time, we were still so young in our understanding as a society. We still have a lot to learn as a society, and I'm very curious to look back in like 10 years and see what new terminology, what new identities do we have, what new conversations are we having. So we weren't at square one in 92 when I was born and a little baby at all. We'd actually come a really long way, but we weren't anywhere near where we're at now. The environment I was raised in, obviously, was a psychotic religious environment where that was not okay. You didn't even consider anyone who's familiar with Christian theology and teachings knows that that is taught as a sin, an abomination, that you would go to hell and be burned for eternity, for things like that. So I want to try and unpack my mindset because queerness is often, at least for me, understood in hindsight. We can look back at our experiences and go, oh, it's not something always that people are understanding actively as they go. And I think that's what maybe people that don't understand what it's like to live as a queer person might not understand. They think you're just supposed to have this understanding as you go, that you're just born and you just wake up and you just understand this, and it's very black and white of who you're attracted to. It's not. It's not at all. Maybe for some people, it is very clear cut. For instance, I've interacted with a lot of gay women that are like, nope, immediately knew. Early on, it was a no question. There was no blurriness at all. But a lot of times, and I'd say more often than not, it's not that way. So for me, being raised in a religiously oppressive environment, which I could do a whole talk on how psychologically damaging that is and how horrible that is. One of the biggest things that makes me upset about it and really brings grief on for me about it is that it really robbed me of those early years of figuring that out. And so I really had to play catch up later in life and still am still unfolding my journey through queerness and through my identity little late in the game. And I'm not speaking about exploring or, being sexually active or anything like that. I'm talking about just the kind of the psychological soup that one is in, the vocabulary that one uses, and the ideas that are presented in the conversations that are had. I'm not even talking about, oh, I didn't get a chance to date a bunch of girls or anything like that. I'm talking about what was implanted into my mind. So I truly believed for a very large portion of my young life that any type of queerness, at that time it was only hetero or homosexual, because that our terms were limited at that time. The vocabulary in these conversations was still in its infancy. I truly believed that it was an abomination. That's what I was taught, and we believe what we're taught when we're kids. I always had thoughts in the back of my mind inside that, like, brainwashing. I was like, "That doesn't add up for me," but I committed to that belief because that's what I was taught. So that was one mindset that I had going on in one layer of the lasagna of my mind. And I'm speaking right now about when I was younger and how I came to understand that, like, oh, something is going on here that's not like everyone else. The second layer of experiences I was having is that I found myself being confused. So I had friends growing up that, when your hormones start kicking in, you start experiencing contraction and things like that. There were so many moments where I had friends that were girls that would be like, "Hey, that guy is so cute. Oh my gosh," like giving them butterflies, like stuff like that. And they would be all Twitter baited and obsessed with this guy, which I totally understand and can identify with. But two things were happening for me that were different. I was having that same experience for guys and for girls. And I was like, I literally, it's so funny to me now. I would think in my mind, I wonder why they don't talk about that stuff with girls too. I would like they would all their conversations would be centered around some boy or some guy like in a magazine or something in terms of attraction or a crush. And I was like, yeah, I feel that too. And I feel that for so and so. So it was always strange to me that they weren't having that experience in more of a global sense. And I just thought that's, you're a frog in the water, you're inside your own brain and your own body. So I just thought, I don't know what I thought. I don't know, but I thought it was weird. I thought it was different. And so, two experiences. I either was not feeling the feelings that my friends were expressing because they would talk about a lot of physical attributes of men and guys and boys that they were attracted to. And I was like, can't relate. I would play along. I'd be like, yeah, his abs are so great. But it was not clicking for me internally. I took note privately in my mind so many times that I was like, "I'm not experiencing what you're experiencing." I would have that experience, but it didn't matter what the gender was, and it was much more, like, emotionally based, almost like demisexual, like, more emotionally or mentally based or some attribute, but it was not what my friends were experiencing, and that was very loud to me very early on. I think I remember noticing that distinction and that difference probably between, like, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, like, that span of years is when I was like, just privately in my mind, and I never told anyone. I do recall trying to have one conversation with a friend who was, like, all boy crazy and these pictures of, like, guys in magazines and stuff, and I remember asking her questions because I felt comfortable and safe enough to be like, "So you're attracted to, like, his body?" And she was like, "Yeah, look at him. He has, like." She was like, oh gosh, I remember this like it was yesterday. She was like, "Look at his muscles and, like, his big arms and, like, his jawline and stuff." And she was going on about his masculine attributes. And I was like, it just was not registering to me. Like, it just was like, you put the input in and nothing, like, it wasn't like, ding, like, no reward center in my brain was going off at all. But I did feel that way about some men, but for different reasons. And I did feel that way almost exclusively about women. And so you can see how later in life I was like, ding ding, somebody was a queer little bunny that had no idea. Now that would lead people to believe, oh, you must be gay. Trust me, I've tried that on. I'm not fully gay. I've looked into it. So, one thing that can happen when people listen to other people's experiences about queerness, and I've had this happen to me before, is that they can come to their own conclusions about what they think that person's sexuality is or that they misunderstand. And so, let me be very clear. I fully understand my sexuality up and down, backwards and forwards, and I'm always open to that growing and changing. I am big enough and vast enough, and I'm not going to cut off other parts of myself either to fit in to a box that on paper makes other people feel comfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like other people want you to be like, "Oh, you're in that box." No, I don't have to be in one of those. And I actually have very valid feelings in all these directions, and I don't have to choose one of them. This is what I know now, obviously. And as long as you're being true to yourself, that's all that matters. Some people may come to believe, I find this a lot with women in hetero-facing relationships if you're queer, that they think that you're depriving yourself of this or you're abstaining from this or that. No, honey, I'm grown and I do exactly what I'd like to do. So, just to clear that up. So, early on when I was a kid, I had the brainwashing and religious repression going on of homosexuality being a sin. We had limited vocabulary because it was still the 90s and early 2000s. I started realizing that there was a difference between me and my friends. I was like, one of these things is not like the other. That was kind of what I experienced. And then there's so many layers to experiences I had that cued me in that I was queer, but I really didn't put it together until much later in life. Like, I still lived my life as a queer person. Um, but I didn't like it's hard to explain how you can be living your life fully as a queer person. If you are a queer person and you are anywhere in that category or you have brushed shoulders with those categories, you will understand what I'm saying. You can be living, acting, behaving, and moving in the world as a queer person, dating the opposite sex, whatever, and not know. You, it's weird. If you have not been through that, it can be hard to understand. I have whole ass been active and dated women for years off and on and still had no clue that I was queer and in terms of identity and how I spoke about myself. And that happens a lot. So those were the different layers of things that were like kind of like pinging that something was different. But again, you're growing, you're changing, you're frog in the water, you don't think anything of it. The other thing that was happening for me that I'm going to try and speak about so that YouTube doesn't take this down is that when I was older and I started opening up about my experiences in high school and things like that, I came to find out that other people weren't doing what I was doing. So I was like, everybody had sex with their girlfriends in high school, right? And other women peers of my age later on in life were like, no, honey, we did not. And I was like, "Wait, what?" So, that's one thing I did not put together or acknowledge until my 20s that I had lost my virginity to a girl. And I just thought that's something you did because, again, frog in the water, lack of exposure because of the repression from religious cult bubble. And you're not comparing notes with the rest of the world. I mean, I think young people are now with social media and with internet, like you literally are comparing notes with the rest of the world and you have access to all the information. I didn't. We didn't have unfettered internet access. I wasn't watching anything. There wasn't constant discussions about sexual identity. We were just living our lives. Now, another funny thing, all of this is in hindsight, is that all of the girls that I was sexually active with throughout high school, they're all queer now as well. So here we are. And that's just how it went. So, but the point that I'm trying to make is that I really didn't put that together until way later. I lived a full experience throughout high school and young adult life as a queer woman and younger girl without knowing it. identifying as hetero, still dating guys, still having a great time. I don't wanna leave out my experience with men at all. Wonderful. 10 out of 10 a lot of the times. But that was the thing that was different for me. And it took me until my 20s to start asking questions and having open conversations with other people because what I'm talking about right now, this very like sensitive, sticky topic, people don't really talk about. You kind of have to quietly just like pick a category and pick a lane and stick to it and don't change it and don't talk about how you got there. And if you don't fit in one of the boxes, just be quiet. And I'm not doing that. I am more interested in how did you arrive there? How did that change over time? What was the messiness along the way? What do you think about your experiences looking back now? Things like that. So that is very much some of the cliff notes on how when I was younger, I experienced life and romance and sexuality and changing and developing. But a lot of it I did not click together into a narrative or identity until much later. Another aspect of this that is important is that girls being active with girls is very much fetishized. Bisexuality, pansexuality, things like that, queer women are fetishized. If you are in the like lesbian, fully gay category, you cease to be as fetishized. You are more fetishized if you're in the in between, meaning that it's a novelty. It's a party trick. It's a fun thing. I find that a lot of women that are bi or pan and they're in hetero-facing relationships, their partner is not alarmed or concerned, does not take seriously their sexual identity because in their mind they've put it in a playful, fetishized place where they're like, "Ooh, that's hot. Oh, that's cool. I have no problem with that." Which is great if that works for you. However, what that tells me is that you're not taking this woman's queerness seriously. You've put it in a playful novelty party trick space. You're not believing, you're not taking this person's queerness seriously. And so that's always kind of a red flag to me. I could talk more about that. When I was younger and I was having experiences with women, that's how that was viewed. So, and there would be women engaging in that we would come away with different experiences. They would come away being excited that they impressed their boyfriend, and I was coming away being like, "Oh, no, that was real for me." Does that make sense? For them, it was a passing party trick. For me, it was like, no, that was a whole experience, and that was a big deal to me, and that meant something to me, and it was hitting different. And I was always the one chosen to performatively engage in queer scenarios for the enjoyment of the males, right? Or if you talked about it and you were open about the fact that you were sleeping with your friends, it was like, oh, that's hot. It was fetishized. It was simplified. It was just this playful thing that was not, it was not placed on the same shelf as I'm dating so and so or I messed around with so and so. It just wasn't. And I still think that happens a lot today as well, especially with queer women that are in hetero-facing relationships. And it's a very interesting dynamic. For some reason, if you're hetero-facing, it's taken very seriously. But if you're in like the bi pan space, your same-sex facing relationships or experiences are not viewed as seriously. And that is very interesting to me. It's a weird imbalance. There's so many imbalances in queer spaces, though. For instance, we set heterosexuality as like ground zero or like the middle of the scale, and then you go one way or the other. That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you want pansexuality to be where gender is not an issue and it's just you're probably one of the most open definitions on the queerness scale as we know it right now, or even asexuality being ground zero where everything spreads out from. But we've got it really backwards and really twisted. We have a long way to go. So, my queer behavior when I was young, to say it in a different way, was viewed as cutesy or was being fetishized. And that was very common, and I'm sure other people have had that experience as well. But that was another cue in that stack where I was like, I'm not having the same experience you're having. Now, did I bring that up? Did I talk about that and be like, hey, that thing we did the other night, like, how did you feel about that? No, because I'm frog in the water and I don't want to be different. I don't want to be different. I want to be the same. So I've got the religious chatter. That's an abomination in my head. I've got, I don't know any different. So I just think, you think that's what everyone's doing and what everyone's thinking. When you're young like that, at least for me, I thought this is just what everyone does. I truly believed, and this is almost embarrassing to say, I truly believed until my 20s that everyone who like went to high school and had girlfriends and stuff was sleeping with their friends. I thought that that was what everyone was doing. Happy Pride Month, it's not. And it took me a really long time to figure that out. And I'm still unpacking a lot of my experiences and looking backwards and, kind of coming to new understandings and shedding new light on past experiences, and I always will be. I'm always learning more about myself in hindsight. And yeah, it's so fascinating. But if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're like, wait, everyone was messing around with their friends in high school or middle school or whatever. No, they weren't. And that is mind blowing to me because that was a huge part of my life growing up. And I just thought it was normal. But also it wasn't normal because it was being made small and it was being fetishized. So it's very complicated in there. So those were a lot of the barriers to me growing up, not knowing my identity and trying to figure out my identity. And I think if you're in a more open environment without religious oppression, or maybe you're in like a public school setting or something like that, you have a lot more opportunity and conversations to figure that out. And there's a lot more mobility. I didn't have that. It didn't exist. You wouldn't even fathom. I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine being like, yeah, I'm gay at that time. No way. I would be like thrown into a pit or something. I don't know. Some biblical strangeness probably would have taken place if I had done that. And I didn't even have the awareness to say that at that time either. So I can look back also on a lot of experiences in terms of relationships emotionally where someone was very close friends with me, but it was more for me, and I didn't understand that at the time, real time. I only understood maybe when we would grow apart or the relationship would change or end that I was having a different experience as them. They would be like, "Okay, bye, friend." Grow apart, people move, things happen, schools change, whatever. And they would be like, "Meh." And I would be like destroyed. I didn't realize until I was, again, older in my 20s, reviewing my life and things like that, and being more honest about my identity, that I had taken that differently and taken that in such a hard light because I was having a queer experience with this friend and they were not. But I think when we were young, we didn't understand. And I envy people that had more mobility and literacy about these things and were in parts of society or families or structures or even school systems that you could even have the presence of mind to figure that out. I started waking up to this as a young person a little bit, and the moment I like accepted and the light bulb came on that I was like, "Oh, being straight, being hetero is not all of who I am," because on the surface I was dating like men exclusively, but I was still like sleeping with women. It was really weird. It was a really weird thing with zero awareness that I was queer at all. The moment I allowed that awareness to come together and just like click, and I gained more vocabulary through life and I was exposed to more experiences. I started doing high school and college together, the PSEO program, if anyone remembers that. Shout out PSEO. So that really allowed me to be around different groups of people that brought my awareness up about these things. As soon as that light bulb clicked a little bit, and I was like, oh, because you start talking to people. You don't sleep with your friends? What are you talking about? Or, you're listening to other people's experiences with this or with that, and you're going, that's different. And you have the bravery to ask more questions, things like that. As soon as that light bulb hit, I was like, oh, I'm gay. I'm a gay woman. Like, doop. I remember specifically telling my parents, I was at a holiday, I think it was a Thanksgiving, and I had an active girlfriend at the time because I was like, as soon as that awareness came online and I kind of started putting these things together, I was like, I'm gay. I'm a lesbian. Boom. And I'd like to take a moment. I remember where I was sitting where this light bulb hit me. I don't know what brought it all together, but enough of hindsight and learning and getting exposed to the world and getting out of religious oppression to realize my first instance of being aware that I was queer and using that language for myself. I cannot tell you. Oh, it's gonna make me cry. The explosion of freedom and relief I felt within myself. Now, granted, I was wrong because I'm not a gay woman. I'm not a lesbian. I'm not. I'm pansexual. I'm have a much more broad spectrum to my sexuality than that. But at the time, just the awareness, and we didn't have more terms than that. You were either gay or straight. I think we did speak about people being bi, but it was in like a joking. We didn't take it seriously. I felt such a rush of freedom and understanding. And I felt so much sadness for not knowing that earlier. Like, my experiences would have been so different if I had known that earlier or been able to explore those parts of myself. And I remember being so wanting to tell everyone. I wanted to be like, "Hello, I'm a lesbian," because I was just so excited to be able to acknowledge and have some degree of understanding about my queer nature. And I remember being so psyched about that. And I remember at the soonest opportunity I had, and it was definitely kind of a gotcha, like, I was like, "I'm gonna tell them." I remember my parents bringing up, like, relationships or dating, and I was like, "Well, I'm a lesbian, and I have a girlfriend, and this is her name." Ooh, that did not go well. That did not go well. It was bad. It was ugly. My mom cried, my dad was pissed. They completely denied it and invalidated it because they had witnessed with their eyeballs my experiences through high school and stuff like that and been like, that's not true. They were upset. And then they were like, that's not true. And you know it. And you've always dated, you never dated women. Obviously, they don't know about my private experiences because parents don't know. And I'm not telling my parents about those experiences because we didn't have a relationship like that. I hope that with my child, I have a relationship like that. But they were livid. They were livid and they were horrible, and they said horrendous things, which only made me double down because 'cause I'm a little firecracker, and I was like, "No, I'm gay. I'm a lesbian, and there's nothing you can do about it." And that felt good, but it did not go well. It was extremely hurtful. It was extremely othering, and I remember thinking in that moment when they were reacting so poorly and just, like, completely invalidating my experience, I remember being like, "This is why I never said anything." Lack of awareness, obviously, and lack of vocabulary and lack of conversation space. This is why this is this is why it is so important to have these conversations. And you have this movement right now from the far right, which is like, oh, they're trying to make everybody gay and like they're just shoving it down their throats. No, we're trying to create space. We're trying to breathe room into this so that it is as normalized and part of the fabric of being as your straightness and this heterosexuality and stuff that you are so obsessed with. We're trying to create equality. And right now, there isn't equality. That is still treated as an aberration with heterosexuality at zero and everything else just swimming around it as like this freak show. That needs to change because unless it really is inundated into conversations in society, kids don't know. And kids have a right to figure that out. They have a right to explore that. They have a right to, we are allowed to have that in our psyche and in front of our eyes, because if I had had the vocabulary available to me, if I had had queer people represented in my life functionally, if I had had that type of language presented to me in my education, basically the adults in my life saying, here's a menu of how one can identify. You can pick and choose from this menu and even create your own category. My life would have been so much better. I would have had so much more of a clear experience. I would have had so much more freedom in my life. I would have felt so much less othered. It just would have been such a different life. And I do have rage about that. And I do have grief and anger about that, that I wasn't allowed to have that. And I will forever be grieving that and playing catch up. And I make sure that my child knows all of the things on the menu and that they can choose those and they can change those and they can explore those at any time. And there's so much more to it. It's not just based off of your physical experiences. It's based off of so many things. How you present yourself, your inner feelings, your personal expression, your gender identity. All of these things are these beautiful ingredients that you can use to cook up who you are, and that it's a fluid thing that you can change at any time. And if I had known that, there's so much discomfort in my life that I could have skipped, that I'm still just now unpacking in my 30s. I'm 34 and I'm just now figuring out how to express myself, what my identity is, and that's just not right. So that's why I get really peppered up when conservative people want to squash down classes, vocabulary, media, or anything involving this type of stuff, because it is so needed. And I didn't even struggle as much as other kids. Think about kids that never see graduation because they kill themselves because they can't stand to live in a society that others them to that degree. Think about our trans brothers and sisters who are living in whole bodies that feel intolerable to them because they never knew that there was another option or that there was a way for them. There's just so much grief packed into there and so much rage. And I would have killed for some of the things that I see that are being offered to students and young people nowadays. Because the core of my wounding happened when I was young from just not knowing my options. I wish I had known my options. It could have been different. It could have been really different, but I was born into a family and a system of insane religious oppression and brainwashing, and I found my way out, and that's a beautiful thing. So that sums up my experience, the cliff notes, the headlines of my experience as a young person being queer and not understanding and knowing that I was queer. And that's why even when I see people in hetero-facing relationships, or I'm friends with someone in hetero-facing relationships, I will still ask them about their sexuality if it feels comfortable and if that's what we're talking about, because I don't know someone's inner world. You would be floored how many hetero-facing relationship people are actually totally queer. They're not repressed. They're not in the closet. They're not missing out. They just happen to be in a hetero-facing relationship. And quick side note, I don't know what the problem is with our freaking brain space as a society, but let's say you're bisexual, right? Bisexual means either gender, typically within the binary of male and female. Bisexual means either. Tell me why, if you are a bi woman and you are in a relationship and you happen to have chosen the male side of that binary, both male and female, bisexual means I like both. I can date and be in relationship with both. And you happen to choose this one, the one of the two choices that you're interested in. Suddenly your queerness is, what is that? Why? But then also there's equal difficulty if you go and you date a female as a bisexual Well, you're really just gay. What is our problem? That was for years identifying as bisexual. I identified as bisexual for the longest period of my life, probably from college age to late 20s before I changed my personal identity to pan. And that's a journey I can talk about too. It's just more of a nuance, you know. Why do we do that? It's the strangest thing. And that's why I say there are so many women and men in hetero facing relationships that are bisexual or queer of some variety, and they don't even talk about it because of that right there. It's too complicated. People don't understand. They make weird assumptions when it's like, no, this is just my identity and this is my partner. I will just never understand how one can be bi and yet still have all your queerness invalidated because you're in a hetero facing relationship. It is the funniest thing to me. And then also to have your relationships with women be invalidated and fetishized, that you're just confused. I'm not confused. I'm very clear in my understanding of my sexuality. And also, get this, it's not relying on your experiences. Do you know you don't have to have any physical experiences with the opposite sex in order to identify as bi? It is completely personal, autonomous decision and identity. And people know. Just believe people when they say, like, why is there always this like gotcha moment? Like, you want to be like, gotcha, caught ya, you're actually blank. I will never understand that. Romance, sexuality, physical relationships, presentation, partnership, all these attributes of relationships are mutually exclusive and they can be mixed and matched. Now, I know there's probably some boomer out there that is just like getting their panties in a wad because they can't fathom that many choices. It's too much. It's overwhelming. I understand it's a lot. The fact of the matter is, you can pick and choose those things. We want so badly to put people in boxes and to say, no, you're in this box. This is your box. Get back in your box because it makes us uncomfortable. All of those elements of relationships are mutually exclusive and they're up to what a couple, a partnership decides and how you feel and your needs. And guess what? In order to figure that out, you got to know yourself and you got to be brave and you got to have hard conversations. I think one of the bravest things people can do in hetero-facing relationships, if they're queer, is have those conversations with their partner. Because the first thing that's going to come up is insecurity. Am I not enough for you? Are you missing out on something? Are you self-abandoning a part of yourself? It gets very touchy, so you have to be brave enough to have those conversations. I am so grateful to be in a hetero-facing relationship where I can fully express my queerness and be a fully queer woman and not feel like that threatens my relationship at all. And it's also okay to come to that understanding later down the road. And if your relationship can't sustain that, growth needs to happen. Growth needs to happen. Typically, that means you're dealing with someone who has not encountered, engaged, or interrogated their own sexuality, typically. But I just think it's an underexplored area. And I think when things are underexplored or they're swept under the rug or they're ignored, it's a breeding ground for toxicity. And that's where we get toxic masculinity and toxic monogamy and toxic heterosexuality and misogyny and things like that. Just they fester. They just fester and thrive in the silence of these things. So my journey is always going to be unfolding. I'm always going to be learning more about my sexuality, and I'm never going to stop doing that. It's a very important part of my life. And I want to be a voice for people that are queer in hetero-facing relationships, that pride is about you too. We have to be respectful in the space that we take up because we are walking with privilege if you're in a hetero-facing relationship, but you can still celebrate pride. You are still queer. You can still take up space. You can still define yourself as a queer woman. You can still engage in queer spaces, even if you're in a hetero-facing relationship. And if you feel that identity change for you throughout your life, I hope that you are brave enough to follow your highest happiness, because sometimes that's the scariest thing. So that's just a little piece of my history as a queer woman living in the topsy-turvy world and currently living my life in an amazing and perfectly fulfilled hetero-facing relationship, yet still maintaining my identity as a queer woman. So happy Pride, y'all. I hope that helps somebody.